everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Karen Gonzalez, and I'm the Product Marketing Manager here at CPP. I will be moderating today's webinar. Now, today's webinar is scheduled for 1 hour, and we will be answering questions throughout and, time permitting, at the end as well. Please send in your questions by using the questions function in the webinar controls. We are recording this presentation, and we will send it to you in the next couple of days. And also, if for any of you tweeters out there, please go ahead and tweet with us using hashtag CVWOW, which is CVWOW. We love to see your tweets. So I would now like to introduce you to two of our presenters, starting with our guest presenter, Ed Hidalgo. Ed Hidalgo leads the World of Work transformation at Cajon Valley USD, and he will discuss his personal journey with the Strong Interest Inventory family of assessments as a core component of integrating career development in K through 12. Ed has reached thousands of students with new technologies developed by CVP Innovation Labs that have maximized the student impact of his work while amplifying human connections in varied settings. His journey includes innovative career development initiatives at Qualcomm, Workforce Labs, Think-A-Bit Labs, University of San Diego, and now Cajon Valley. Now our second presenter is Chris Mackey. Chris Mackey is the General Manager of CPP Innovation Labs, a division of CPP, the Myers-Briggs Company. His most recent endeavors include working with high school, post-secondary institutions, and employers to expand access to personality and interest insight for individuals while providing strategic insight to the organizations that serve them. He will be providing a brief overview of how key functionality of the Vita Navis lifelong learning platform can be used by higher ed partners to engage prospective students and the larger community with super strong assessments. Now, again, I'd love to encourage you to please send in your questions throughout so we can make this more interactive. And quick note, we will be playing videos throughout, so if you have any issues with audio, GoTo usually shows you a little note that says you can turn on your audio so that you can hear them. So just a note on that. But now I'd like to turn over the webinar to Ed. So welcome, Ed.
Hi, Karen. Good morning, and good morning to everyone on the call today. It's an honor to be here, honor to be representing our work in Cajon Valley, and certainly the work that we're doing with CPP. It's always a unique opportunity to be able to share a little bit about your story, and I can't remember the last time that I really shared the story kind of from the beginning to where we are today, and it has been an amazing blessing, and certainly have loved doing this work. And so for those of you on the line, and perhaps you're working in universities, perhaps you're career counselors, coaches, I hope this story resonates. I hope the work that we're doing here resonates with you, and hopefully brings you some new thoughts and ideas around the work that we're doing. Certainly as we think about the world of work and how it's changing, the dramatic changes that are happening globally, how people are connected to work is changing, and it always has. Certainly that's always been a part of transitions throughout each generation, kind of the role of work, how we do work, and how we gain access to it. It certainly does seem like it's changing faster than ever due to technology, and certainly many of us are kind of waiting to see, in some cases, what it's going to look like in 5 and 10 years from now. Will we be riding autonomous vehicles, and kind of what will be the impact of robotics and artificial intelligence and other technologies in the workplace? Will entire swaths of work go away, and what new careers will evolve? So our work is really about preparing young people for that unknown future, and so I hope that you appreciate our time together. I hope that you ask questions, and so let's kind of dive into it. So I wanted to start a little bit with kind of the career resume, because as many of you, as I imagine, many of you are working with young people, young adults, maybe mid-career, and maybe even retirees. So I think my career is one that's been quite interesting, in that for more than 20 years, really, I lived on the hiring side. I wasn't as much advising people about work, although that was certainly an interesting part of the work. I really worked on the hiring side. And so for a number of years, I worked for Manpower. And if you're familiar with that firm, you know that they're the world's second largest staffing company. So they put millions of people to work every single day in countries all around the world. And I got to lead recruiting teams here in San Diego that that allowed us to place thousands of workers across many different types of industries every single day. And that really provided me kind of that kickstart to this world of work. For me personally, school was very, very challenging. I often remember thinking, you know, who would ever hire me? My math skills are really lacking, and the math seems to be really important to the adults. How will I find my place in the world? Who would ever hire me? And so, interesting, you know, getting into this work of temp staffing and finding and getting exposure to this myriad of different careers. And it was actually an honor to be able to place people in jobs and to help them find work that would feed their families, that would bring them enjoyment, etc. And so I have high regard for the world of staffing and what it can do for people's lives. From there, I moved to Qualcomm, and Qualcomm was actually one of my customers, and they hired me away. And I had the first real opportunity to now represent a major corporation, a major Fortune 500 company, and get exposure to hiring talent really all over the globe. And the majority of those workers were engineers, were high wage, high skill, computer scientists, electrical engineers from places like Berkeley and Stanford and MIT. And it really opened my eyes to the world of employment and really working with this higher order level of workers. Again, high skill, high wage, and the role of work in their lives. In many cases, not different than the temp staffing that I was doing at Manpower. People want good jobs, they want to use their talents, they want progression, and you know, they want to do good work. So I learned so much throughout those periods, and then that led me to taking a lot of that work over those multiple years in staffing, and start applying the work really to working with young people in our service back to the communities. So many of you have heard the term corporate social responsibility. Qualcomm had a very big presence around serving community. And so I started to be able to take a lot of the things I learned about the confusion around work. How do you get a job? How do you get hired at Qualcomm? How do you get your first job out of school? How do you transition from career to career? What happens when you get laid off? What happens when you deal with struggles in your job? And we started to share that out. And I'll hit on some of that here in a little bit. And then that work really progressed for me, and that I then decided to move and to take some of the work that I had been doing in that corporate social responsibility space, specifically around career development, and went and did that work at University of San Diego. And then I was hired here in Cajon Valley, essentially to do this work in the earliest of grades. So imagine all that work around hiring, exposure to the world of work, exposure to career development. We would now be designing that work to start as early as transitional kindergarten in our school district. So not a normal career path, but certainly it's all of those experiences that have allowed me to be where I am today, doing this work that I really care about, and really helping every child find their place in the world through the discovery of their strengths, interests, and values. So I'll hit more on that here in a little bit. So from there, we, you know, at Qualcomm, I really wanted to touch on kind of this career development practice that we started there at Qualcomm. And as I mentioned, working with these brilliant engineers from, you know, Berkeley, Stanford, and MIT, it was so interesting that many of these engineers and many of employees in general didn't know how to manage their careers. And it's quite interesting because, you know, you spend so many years in school, and for many people, they're on this conveyor belt of education, and, you know, they get out into the workforce, and you have an expectation that your employer is going to help you with your career path, that they're going to manage your career for you. And, that certainly wasn't the case. And I don't believe it is the case in many high-tech businesses. And so, folks, were struggling in some cases. And as, we launched our climate surveys, we knew that career development, career exploration was a big desire of our employees. And really, there's not a whole lot that's offered in the way of career services, for these workers. And as you probably know, engineers are pretty expensive. And so if you're not getting levels of engagement and productivity from your engineers, then you're not getting your money's worth, and certainly have employees who aren't very happy with what they're experiencing on the job. So it took a number of tries to pitch this concept, but we started a career services practice, and pretty much the only evidence that you'll find of it anywhere is this article in the Electronic Recruiters Exchange, the Career Center, and one of the last places you'd look. And that's because our head of staffing really didn't want to publicize it. He felt that this work was a competitive advantage, and so we really didn't share it out too much. But while I was there, we served more than 15,000 engineers, and it was all by word of mouth. It was completely voluntary, and it was led by career counselors, some of the best career counselors here in San Diego, and it really took off. And what was interesting was this slide, because the executives heard of the activity that was taking place here, and now vice presidents wanted to get involved, and they wanted to bring these services to their teams, et cetera. So they would ask us, what exactly is happening in career explorations? What is taking place in your group? And so it was interesting that when we surveyed our employees, what they told us on the way in was what you see on the left of your screen, that the employees were coming to us for title, pay, promotion, and with things that we call the extrinsic motivators. And then it was interesting that upon exiting the practice, the employees were now telling us that they were really looking for meaningfulness, purpose, and what we call progress in their work. And that was a big mindset shift in our views, to be able to shift their thinking from the extrinsic to the intrinsic. Because when you think of your talent, if your folks are motivated from an extrinsic perspective, well, it'd be quite easy for any company to come in and swoop away your top talent by giving them a higher pay, a better title, change their working environment, etc. But if your employees can be engaged from an intrinsic level around the meaningfulness and the purpose of work, and their competence and having choice and gaining trust, well, it's a little bit harder to pull somebody out of a company when they've kind of found their place, so to speak, when their work is meaningful. And so this was a big aha moment for us, and it really kind of was that litmus test around, why are folks coming? What are they getting out of it? And that work continues on to this day at the organization. So if you ask, what were you doing in that environment? Well, I would say that the foundation of the work was really around the identification of and coaching around the concepts of strengths, interests, and work values. This was kind of the core of the work. And it was just interesting to see that, for many of these folks, again, high skill, high wage, high education, they had never had any form of exposure to these concepts. This was brand new for them, almost like we were re-engineering in some respects the individual, and building their self-awareness. So as we think about our own strengths, my top 5 strengths, and we do work quite a bit with the Gallup Strengths Finder. but this concept of how it is that we do things, those are my top 5. Our interests, what we like to do, and then our values. For me, I use the career anchors. There's lots of values tools, and of course, I love the CPP tools as it relates to values and interests. But this is how we started to kind of organize and engineer our employees around the understanding of how you do things, what it is you like to do, and why. And this started really shifting conversations, and really it led to the employees being able to better manage their careers because of the understanding that they now had around how they were designed and what they really care about. And so that was special. And it's that work that you see kind of in front of us here, the strengths, interests, and values work, that is at the core of the foundation of the work that I'm doing today. So how do we get there? However, while I was at Qualcomm, I had mentioned that we moved into this corporate social responsibility space, and now was hosting school districts to come to Qualcomm, and we were serving young people using the strong interest inventory and using the values-based assessments. And we saw lots of kids, we saw lots of veterans that came through our program. We ran week-long camps on site with high schoolers, and it was about 3,500 folks that came through. This was a 20% time project in many cases. This wasn't my full-time job, but this was something that I was incredibly passionate about. Again, we had seen the value with the adults, and so we thought, well, how can we do this with young people? How can we do this with veterans? How can we help them discover their strengths, interests, and values? So we ran these camps, and then was able to create a lab that was called the Think a Bit Lab, and you can look this up online. This is essentially a dedicated makerspace for middle school students to get exposure to engineering, but to also learn about the world of work. And so while I was at Qualcomm, we saw 15,000 students that came through this lab, and it was, really quite an experience to see that many middle schoolers and adults come to this space to learn about Qualcomm. I'll say that the majority of the middle schoolers that came thought they were going to Qualcomm Stadium, which was quite surprising that, in their own backyard, essentially, 25, 30, maybe 40 minutes from home, was the world's largest fabless semiconductor company that's powering the mobile devices that are in, all of their pockets, their back pockets. But they had no idea that Qualcomm existed or what Qualcomm does in middle school. That was kind of shocking. Then we would see, young people that would come, and it would be their first trip ever in an elevator, and the principals would share this with us. And there were many kids who had never seen the ocean. And so it really gave us a perspective. It gave me personally a perspective, what kind of exposure are young people getting to the world of work? And at a time when the world of work is changing so dramatically, how are we making connections between coursework and, what students could possibly do in the future? How their strengths, interests, and values could be aligned to the world of work. So here we were getting great press. The mayor's writing about this lab. We're in Wired magazine because we're teaching all these kids how to code, etc. But the thought was in my mind, how are these kids going to get exposure? Number one, and will they ever understand anything about their unique strengths, interests, and values? Much like the adults that we had worked with at Qualcomm, right? These highly educated engineers, Berkeley, Stanford, MIT, PhDs, engineers, computer scientists. What chance would these kids have to find their place in the world? So that's when I left. I left the company. I went to University of San Diego. I ended up designing this work around career development with the professors there, and that's what landed me in the school district. Actually, we have 27 schools and 900 teachers and 17,000 students. It's a big school district, and you really start to get a feel for their level of responsibility of the lives of young people, and how we're actually going to prepare them for the future. And our superintendent, Dr. David Miyashiro, looks at quite a bit of data, and I want to share some of the data with you that we've been looking at most recently, because I think it's very relevant as well for the work that you're doing, wherever it is that you're coming from, your perspective. Some of these slides, I think, are ones that you'd want to be aware of, and especially these first two slides that were created by Dr. Raj Chetty, who's a professor at Stanford, who's looking at big data nationally, and he's looking at poverty and social mobility. And so it's incredible to see this slide where you look at kind of that vertical axis, mean child income rank at age 30, and on that horizontal axis, you look at parent income rank. And what you see very, very clearly is that the kids' futures in many cases are baked based on their parents. So are we saying that zip code in some cases bakes the future for a child? And if this is the case, how do we break this cycle? And so this is an unbelievable slide, and we believe that it's our responsibility to do something about it. When we look at the fading American dream, more Chetty research, and again, you can go and look at all this either through Brookings or through his work at Stanford, and it's census data that they're looking at. They're looking at a bunch of big data, but this is real. This is real for our children. And so how will we break this cycle? And then even more close to home, because that was national data, is this data right here in our own backyard. Here in San Diego, we have 41,000 young people ages 16 to 24 years old that are not in school and they're not working. And we call them our disconnected youth. And this is research and data that's come from our Workforce Investment Board. Perhaps you've heard of your own local WIBs. They should be tracking this data with your local governments. But this is a big topic. And for us, we're fifth on this list where you see El Cajon and Santee. We rank fifth on this list of disconnected youth. And so, whose responsibility is it to prepare young people for the world of work? How are young people going to connect their future possible selves if they don't know who they are, what their strengths are, what their interests and what their values are? How will they make those connections? And how will that affect their desire to stay in school, to connect their current self to their future self? That's the work that we're doing. This is the work we need to concern ourselves with. And there's a number of articles that you could research, like this one from our local Union Tribune that speaks on this issue much further. And for us, Latinos make up a significant portion of that 41,000, close to 50%. So this is the work that we're doing. This is the work that we care about. This is the work that has started back from my days at Qualcomm. These concepts of strengths, interests, and values. And so as children are asking, these questions, right? How is this connected to the world of work? I hear this from teachers all the time. Students are always asking, well, why does this matter? Why does this work matter? What I believe students are really asking is, how do I matter? How am I connected to the world of work? Why am I here? And so how are we doing at answering that question for kids? Anywhere through the educational journey. How are we doing at connecting kids with their place in the world? So we believe that we need to close that gap. We need to make it super relevant for young people and for teachers. And we do believe that education in the world of work, we must close that gap. And if we don't, we'll have more students that are confused about their futures. And I don't believe pathways are enough of an answer to these questions. I believe that we really need to focus not just on exploration and exposure, but also self-awareness. And I'll share that a little bit more about that in a minute. So I'm going to skip that slide, and I'm going to move right to our community mission. I want to make it clear that the work that we're doing, and we're actually building kind of that bridge between education and the workforce and business. Our work is deeply steeped in with our city mayor, our chief of police, our chief of fire, our city operations teams, etc. And so, as a community here in El Cajon, this is the mission, and it's to make Cajon Valley the best place to live, work, play, and raise a family. And we, as the body of education here in K-8, feel that this is an important role that we must play. As we look even more deeply at our vision, it's that we need to develop happy kids and healthy relationships on a path to gainful employment. And so we don't believe that happiness for a child should only be on the other side of success. That kids should be able to come to school every day and be happy, to develop healthy relationships. But we know that there must be a path for them to gainful employment. And we know that children from a very early age are curious about their place in the world. And so we must make those connections for them, especially in communities with low social economics, where there's rates of poverty. You know, it's more important than ever to ensure that we're making these connections for young people. And it has to be purposeful connections. We can't just talk about it. We can't just say that we'd like for this to be our vision. We have to actually implement new frameworks, new ideas, in order to make this possible. So that's the work that we're doing in Cajon Valley, and we call it the modern curriculum. Yes, absolutely. Students need to be able to read, write, and do math. Absolutely, most definitely. And there's plenty of research around the importance of those things happening early for children and for them to have success in those areas. But we know that that's not enough for our kids to be prepared for the future world of work. So our modern curriculum includes, for all children, computer science through code.org, which is free. They have free curriculum. It includes presentation literacy through TED-Ed, also free curriculum through the TED organization. I'm sure you've all seen TED Talks. It includes social emotional learning through Sanford Harmony, which is also free and easy to access for educators. And the fourth is what we call the world of work. And in that case, based on our model and based on the work that we've been doing with CPP, that is work that we had to create. We had to design. We had to make it because it did not exist. And we'll say that it did not exist because of this belief that career development is a human process. And so I understand that there are many software programs, there are software curriculums, there are lots of tools and apps to allow young people to explore kind of who they are and how that may connect to the world of work. But that is not sufficient to help a young person or a young adult to really build their self-image, build their self-concept. It really takes so much more, and especially in communities where the communities are struggling, where people are struggling, it's that much more difficult for young people to start to develop their own self-concept when all around them they see struggles and pain and difficulties and failure. Our teachers have 180 days to develop a relationship with a child. So our job is to embed and to intertwine career development into our classrooms so it's part of what all students are experiencing in our district. And so we could talk about assessments all day long, but any assessment, no matter how good, is only as good as its interpretation. Dr. Ian Martin, professor at USD, would speak to that quite frequently. And this is what we believe. We're just not going to give kids assessments and a workshop and say they're good, they're fine. This is really a lifelong process that takes so much more time to help young people develop that sense of self. So, and really this work is steeped in research, and that's why I add the research lit here. When we started with our theory of change and our theory of action, and then building our frameworks, we started with the theorists that had created the work well ahead of us, and that had helped us, design our guideposts for the work that we would do. And I'm sure that most of you or all of you are familiar with these important bodies of research, from social cognitive to the strengths-based movement, moving away from deficits, and Douglas Super, the concept of lifespan, right? That we're traveling through these mini cycles of careers throughout our entire lives, all the way through retirement. The work of Linda Gottfredson out of Delaware, and really her work around self-image and perceptions and gender. I mean, really important to work on those very early on. The work of Dr. Eiserman out of USC around possible selves and identity-based motivation, which is what I believe we're seeing in our district when we see youngsters connecting and reading better. They're connecting who they are with their possible future selves. Of course, the RIASEC, and of course, the theory of work adjustment, both person, environment, and fit areas of research. So all of this really grounds our work. But I love this quote from Dr. Peter McElveen. He's a researcher out of Australia, but kind of like synthesizing that previous slide to where does career guidance fit? And so I love the statement that it's all about learning. Career guidance is all about learning. It's not a point in time. It's a lifelong process. It is embedded contextualized learning. It shouldn't be another thing in the classroom. It should be embedded with math, science, reading, presentation. It is about education, right, and growth. And it is transformative when we understand the why, when we have the context around what we're learning in the classroom. Young people grow, they get excited about school, they see that there's a place in the world for them. And so it's these kind of core tenets that led us to the work that we're doing today and our framework. So this is our career development framework. This is what we've designed in Cajon Valley for every child, every grade, and every year. That every child would participate in this 3 core process that we call the mission of me, and that they would experience a level of self-awareness, their strengths, their interests, and their values. And certainly that's how we tie back to CPP in many ways, and the use of the super strong and on the Vita Navis platform and the strong interest inventory, etc. And that every child, of course, would have exposure to the world of work. We often say, how does a child aspire to a career they don't know exists? We must give them exposure. And then thirdly, that every child would have the opportunity to tell their story. And we can think very clearly why that's important. As your first interview, when you step into human resources, what's the question that you're going to be asked? Tell me about yourself. And how much we struggle with even that basic question. Tell me about yourself. It's a hard question to answer, but it's not quite so difficult, or as difficult, when we understand who we are, how we do things, and why. And that's all about the 3 core process: self-awareness, exploration, and the ability to tell my story. So after the career development framework, you might be asking, okay, well, how are you actually integrating this? How is this happening in classrooms? So we've designed an integration framework that we're using in our district for every child, every grade, every year. There's 4 levels of exploration where students can connect their learning and businesses can connect their work. And so, so every child will receive exploration, a level 1, a level 2, simulation. They'll meet a pro in level 3. And our level 4 is still in kind of design, but I think there's elements of authentic demonstrations of learning that are happening in partnership with business and parents, etc. But that level 1 is really about starting to understand the RIASEC typology, starting in transitional kindergarten. The simulation is really about students starting to simulate the work experiences that they're learning about. Level 3 is really about, again, meeting that pro. and then level 4 is practice. And so let me share a little bit more about how we're actually accomplishing this. So we're using the RIASEC framework for children to have exposure to careers in each of the theme areas. What we don't want is for children to start foreclosing on career opportunities or ideas around careers due to that the gender stereotyping in particular. But there's a number of reasons that students would start foreclosing. What you could read up on circumscription and compromise, some of Linda Gottfridson's work. But essentially, every child, every grade, every year is going to experience one of these careers on their grid based on their grade level. And in each of those career areas, they're going to have those 4 elements of exposure, right? So it's exposure, it's simulation, it's meet a pro, and then it's practice, so demonstrations of learning. And so imagine that a kindergartner that graduates out of 8th grade will have had 54 world of work experiences, and they'll have had experiences in STEM careers, in the trades. These careers were selected from the strong interest inventory. So there's a variety of careers, and we're adding new careers to the grid. Teachers are designing careers. We have business partners, and it's working quite nicely. So it's an opportunity to really provide a deep level of exposure, and this is happening in our classrooms. So it's very exciting. You know, Holland is it's a brand new concept for our educators, and I'm going to move through some of these slides fairly quickly. But all of you, I'm sure you understand Holland, and as I speak to educators, certainly they're surprised when they see the research, you know, the importance of interest fit, right? A substantial body of research has shown that interest fit predicts employment outcomes such as job satisfaction, income, and job performance. So we're grounding in interest fit and interest using Holland, and kindergartners totally understand this, by the way. I think we as the adults get in the way too often and don't believe that young people can understand how their interests align to the world of work. And believe me, they absolutely do. And it's been inspiring to watch young people and their excitement around these elements. So we ground with interest because interests have the highest correlation to career satisfaction, performance, and income. And just practically speaking, you know, it's interesting to see that Oklahoma State, Ohio State, maybe other universities, they classify all their majors by the O-Net. And then, of course, you know that the O-Net classifies all 900 plus careers based on the RIASEC. And then, of course, our gold standard in assessments, the strong interest inventory, classifies all the results based on the RIASEC. So if a student can graduate out of 12th grade understanding their RIASEC themes and have had all these opportunities to experience who they are and how it aligns to the world of work, might they make better decisions at the university level and make better decisions as they go on to their future career. So you know, the challenge for us is that we had to design all the resources to do this work. And so we did. We spent a year designing all the RIASEC-based materials. We have all of our materials are either in physical or in digital, and we're making them accessible to school districts around the nation. And that has just started in the past year. Of course, everything is online, and Eddieware is our partner, or we license our IP to our partners. Yes, we're a school district, but we also think we have some really great IP. So we are making it available for others, mostly because others are asking for it. So, but this is how we're getting the work done. And at the end of the day, you know, this is kind of, if you're left with like one final image about our work, it's really around this concept of exposure and, you know, providing every child the opportunity to hear about careers, to tinker with the careers, to meet someone who does it, which is so important. There's lots of research on that, and then to practice it, to actually do it hands-on. And so, you know, so that's what's happening across our district. We're in our first year. We're studying it over 3 years longitudinally, and we'll be researching a lot of these kind of possible selves, concepts. And I'm going to skip that video. Maybe we'll come back to it. But I at least want to show you what does it look like in the classrooms. And you know, RIASEC exploration in the classrooms. We have RISEC themes all over the place in classrooms across grade levels. What I really love is how students and teachers are making connections to the RISEC very directly. And so off to the right, and these are all tweets that I've cut. We're big on Twitter. And so which personality type from RISEC do you think best describes Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.? Give reasons to support your answer. These are kind of the examples of how the RISEC is finding its place in classrooms, integrated into existing content without being just another thing. You're seeing RISEC, bulletin boards cropping up with students' interests linked to each of the RISEC themes. Teachers are getting incredibly creative. Pictorial input charts for the careers are showing up. This is a second grade classroom. And it's been quite stunning to see it roll out and be kind of this living, breathing part of the classroom. And while we certainly have shared our ideas of how the materials and the levels 1 through 4 should roll out, we're providing teachers an ample amount of teacher flexibility and creativity to be able to make it their own, which is so important, and which, sadly, we've taken away from many teachers through many initiatives like No Child Left Behind. So exploration is happening in lots of different ways. Again, that level 1 experience, the exposure. Students are learning about all the different careers in many different ways, and they're starting to hear about careers they didn't know existed. What's a civil engineer, or even customer service rep, to be thinking about, what does that work look like, feel like? Students are getting exposure to that. They're getting exposure to construction jobs, et cetera, which is so important. We all know the demands currently on our nation's tradesmen and women, and I think the average age is 55. We're going to really be in some trouble in the not too distant future if we don't have more students moving into the trades. And then our level 2 simulations, they look like lots of different things, and we've created all the simulations digitally, and students are building roller coasters, and they're designing cities, and they're again putting on kind of the impact of the work. They're simulating and being that civil engineer for the day. So that's a level 2. Level 3, students are meeting pros, and I'll just share for one quick second that we have a great partner. If you haven't heard of Nepris is a social media platform that connects business people to the classroom virtually using the Zoom technology. And in this case, one of our very first teachers to use the technology, because certainly it's scary using new tech, but essentially you go into the system and you put in a search request for the talent. And theme park engineer is one of our careers on the grid. And this was an Imagineer from Disney who came into the classroom virtually from his office and was able to speak to students about being an Imagineer. So it's hard to scale field trips. It's hard to scale business people coming to the classroom, but it's very possible to scale level 3 Meet a Pro experiences when the pros are coming in virtually through a technology like Nepris. It's an incredible solution to a very challenging problem, but we can scale it equitably across our district for every child in every grade and every year. And then level 4, our practice, our demonstration of learning. I wanted to share this because our students, these are 3rd grade students that are building their own websites and in 3rd grade, and they're building their own Google sites based on their own strengths, interests, and values. And so they're able to do this because we're a 1-to-1 district. All of our students have a Chromebook that's theirs, and here are students at getting to be the end of the school year. They've already experienced 5 of the RISEC theme careers. They've understood and are going through their own self-reporting process around their interests, and now they're starting to create their own websites that kind of identify their own unique selves. their own unique qualities and characteristics. So it's to me, it was an awesome example of what's possible when students get exposure to all of these important themes. So I want to transition and just kind of touch a little bit here on why CPP and why Vita Navis. I think well, I'm going to hit on that on the next slide. So I'm just going to jump into it. Why do I work with CPP? Why do I use the Vita Navis? Well, I don't think we can look past the importance of validity, reliability, and the empirical nature of the work that's created out of CPP. And it's very easy for developers to go out and design questionnaires and kind of sexy assessments that look slick and cool, but they don't have the research behind them. There's no validity or reliability. So are we really comfortable sharing that with students? And I think for the most part, we're not. So it's important to be working with partners who have kind of the research behind them, that have the tools that are needed to be able to do the work. And so just through my own personal journey of being certified MBTI and the strong interest inventory and the tools, using the tools that are meant to be doing the work that we're doing by practitioners, by psychometricians who understand how the tools are meant to be used is really important. And finally, really is the support and partnership. I've worked with lots of suppliers. I've worked with lots of partners, and it's just when you're doing the work, and you're inventing, you need to have partners who understand how to be flexible, adaptable, creative, and that's what I've always received from Chris Mackey and the team at CPP. So I can't invent and create new things if I don't have partners that aren't going to flex with me. So I can't highlight these kind of key bullets enough. So there's a lot of you out there that probably like me, where like my favorite assessment is the strong interest inventory. I love the strong interest inventory. I use it with small groups, and I use it with mom and the child or dad and the child. They both take the assessment at the same time. There's lots of ways to use the tool. I love it. It's just very hard to scale, and because it's complex, right? And there's a lot to it. Now, I didn't want to move to the strong interest or to the super strong originally because I was so committed to the assessment, to the strong interest inventory assessment. And what I figured out was I can't reach enough people, quite frankly, to do this work. And so I started to dip my toe into using this super strong, and then now, I don't know, 3 or 4 years later, however many years it's been, what I'm finding is that they are not a replacement for each other. That when I use the super strong, it allows me to prepare people to take the strong interest inventory. Not all folks who take the super strong are going to need or be in a place or be ready even to take the strong interest inventory, but it is a powerful 1-2 punch from my own experience. So they've been the perfect complement for each other, depending on what my needs are at the time. So as I was stepping into this district, I'm sure you can all appreciate that I had, probably out of my 900 teachers, probably 875 have never heard of the RISEC before. And, the super strong allowed me to scale up with teachers, and the counselors certainly had some sort of familiarity with the super strong, but they're not doing the work with the students. So the entire teacher population had to take the super strong, and then we started slowly bringing in board members and principals. And my dream really is to start bringing in parents and community at a whole nother level. Can you imagine the impact of parents understanding their own RISEC themes and then being able to understand their children's RISEC themes and watching them progress over time. You know, what sort of summer camps you might put your children in, what sort of extracurriculars might they participate in. The Super Strong just allows me to scale and to have a level of breadth and reach that I couldn't accomplish with the Strong Interest Inventory. So I will not remove the Strong from my repertoire, certainly not. But the Super Strong, again, it just allows me to scale the work. So so I know we're kind of running short on time here. I did want to share with you real quickly, because you're probably, how are they doing this with kids? And so we use a lot of self-reporting with our younger grades, K through 5. All students are self-reporting, and they're self-reporting their interests, and it's quite successful. And this is kind of one of the models that we use for self-reporting. And so I figured I would just kind of share this with you real quickly. So, you know, when I start with students and teachers, they begin by exploring the RISEC. Like at the beginning of the school year, this is what they're doing. And they're watching these 6 YouTube videos created by the University of Buffalo, the counseling department there, which provides a description of each interest theme. And it's very useful. I don't know if you've ever seen them before. We can certainly share the links. I was intending to share, but I think we'll run out of time. As students as early as kindergarten are watching these videos on mute, because we're not using the voiceover for youngsters, and we're slowing down the speed on YouTube to about half the normal speed, as students completely understand what's happening in these animated videos. I highly recommend that you check them out. And then students are identifying which themes resonate most for them. And then when we're working with the adults or the older students that's starting in middle school, then they'll take the Vita Navis platform and complete their Super Strong. So it's really a process where they're going to self-report. This is the RISEC, one of the RISEC formats that we use, where students will take notes. They'll then watch the RSA Animate video, which I'm not going to play now because we don't have time, but we'll make sure that you get the links if you want them. They're going to get a brief description, for example, on the realistic theme, and then they're going to go ahead and start self-reporting. Does that sound like you? With the goal at the very end to basically assess their top themes. Then they're going to take the Super Strong, and what I often say is, you had the chance to self-report. Who wants to see the science? And of course, all the hands go up, the parents' hands go up. They're like, yes, we want to do it too. We want to try that. How do we do it? And the beauty is that it takes 10 to 12 minutes. You can do it on your mobile. The results come back right away, and it's very easy. I have my students, you know, selecting their career, identifying their careers. They have their top 3 themes. And then we go into a turn and talk. We go into a reflection. Which 2 or 3 themes did you select? Which best describe you? Which themes will be missing? And I'm gonna end with the last couple slides. We have then been driving all this awareness with parents and students into these beautiful trees that we call the Me Tree, where students take their strengths, interests, and values, and they design these beautiful pictorial images of themselves and their kind of key qualities and characteristics. And these have become such a hit with our parents. It's been fantastic to see. There's so much that we can do when we understand ourselves. And that work really drives into our student profiles, which we won't spend any time on. And with that, I'll just say thank you. There's a bunch of articles that we've either written or had podcasts with. If any of this has been even remotely interesting, I hope it has. You know, we'd love to share some of these links. So, so with that, I'm going to turn it back to Karen and Chris probably here. If I can share that back with you, Chris, I'm going to do it right now. And I'm sorry that I took a long time, but you gave me permission, Chris Mackey, so that's why it happened.
Well, Ed, I just wanted to say before you switch it over to me, thank you very much for that intense, detailed overview of your work. We at CPP Innovation Labs are always so impressed with your work at Cajon Valley and before working with you at Think a Bit Lab and elsewhere. So thanks for your time. And I think you offered some great practical tips that can be put into classrooms if we have teachers on the line. But I think, one of the things that I just wanted to really quickly talk about was where Vita Navis comes into this, and how you, a lot of you are counselors or at other universities and colleges, post-secondary institutions. And one of the challenges that we see out there is that students are faced with too many decisions. They're very much confused, and making a decision is overwhelming. And one of the things that we've heard in California is that a lot of students decide on a program at the community college, and we've heard this literally from 3 community colleges, by choosing accounting. And the reason that they choose accounting is because it's at the top of the list. So they're really unclear about their goals and objectives. Colleges and universities offer 100 or more programs and major options. And at the same time, colleges and universities too often struggle to meet individual advising needs. So we really have focused on the Super Strong, on Vita Navis, to help students align their interests with a future goal. But we also look to create action in the real world to get students to make decisions. And we figure that's the best action they can take, especially if it aligns with their strengths, interests, and values. So 3 key features of Vita Navis are universal access, data sharing, and the exploration of interest fit to support those decisions. I wanted to talk to you about universal access, and then we'll move on to questions if we have a little bit extra time here. But our model is really focused on providing as much access to students as possible. Through the Vita Navis platform, you as a college or university are able to provide high school students in your community with access to the Super Strong. So if you were inspired by anything that you saw on this webinar earlier, and you're interested in engaging with prospective students in a meaningful way like Ed described, that's possible through the Vita Navis platform because of the universal and unlimited access that we provide for students. And at the same time, what we seek to do is provide you as counselors, as admissions advisors, as academic advisors, and as administrators, we seek to provide you with insight that can help you support student success through more insight into the entire student population, their interests, and how they align with what they're studying in that profile. So with that being said, I'll mention that you'll be receiving an email as an attendee of this webinar from CPP, from us. And in that email, there's some webinars that you can come to that are a half hour that provide you with an overview of the Super Strong on Vita Navis and some of the use cases that we see out with community outreach and providing this universal access to prospective students, as well as your enrolled students, to drive things like student retention and better student success outcomes. So with that being said, I'll turn it over to Karen in case there are questions.
All right, thanks, Chris. So we don't have many questions. We just had a few questions that came through about what is a Super Strong. So what I also wanted to say is, just to add on to what Chris just mentioned, is that we will be sending you a follow-up email, and we're going to include the recording to this webinar if you just want to review it later. And we will include some links where you can register for any upcoming Super Strong demo. It's about half an hour, and you can send it for any time slot that works for you. So I just want to take this opportunity to thank Ed Hidalgo. Thank you so much for your presentation. It was wonderful. It was really great to learn from you, and just to see all the amazing things that you're doing with the students and what you've been doing in the past as well. So I want to say thank you to our attendees. Thank you for taking the time to be on this webinar, and we'd love to host more of these webinars. We've been doing a few of them. If you're familiar with the Ask an Expert series that we had a few years back, I was the one that was moderating those, and I am trying to bring something back like that. So if any of you that are on this call have some feedback for topics that you'd like to hear, please go ahead and respond to the email that we send out. That'll be coming from CPP, but really I'm the one that's checking those emails. So with that, if you have any questions, please go ahead, feel free and contact us. But if not, thank you so much, and thank you, Ed, and thank you, Chris. And I hope everyone has a great day. Goodbye, everyone.